We pay tribute to the life of a revolutionary South African leader.
And authorities have recovered stolen radioactive material near Mexico City. We'll have more on the story.
A verdict has been reached in the Richard Tuitt retrial. Stay tuned for the outcome.
And it finally feels like winter in San Diego. We have so many great seasonal events. I'm going to make sure that you're dressed properly for the weather. Newscene starts right now.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Newscene. I'm Aaliyah Bora.
And I'm Joshua Lipton. Thank you for joining us this fine evening.
Unfortunate news out of South Africa this week. Legendary activist Nelson Mandela has died at the age of 95. Teresa Romero is here with the latest. Teresa.
Thank you, Aaliyah. The African leader became a symbol of unity to many around the world. As South Africa's first democratic president, Nelson Mandela brought in an era of peace and after decades of racial division and his own political imprisonment. Tonight, many around the world are mourning his death.
Nelson Mandela's life began in a small village called Transeska before moving to Johannesburg. There he became a lawyer where he later joined the National Congress. In the 1950s and 60s, the realities of white domination in South Africa made the dream of African independence unattainable.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence.
Mandela was arrested and charged with treason and sentenced to life in prison. After 27 years in jail, he was finally released at the age of 71. In the following years after his release, Mandela went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize and became South Africa's first black president.
I assume, as executive president in the service of the Republic of South Africa,
Nelson Mandela served as president until he announced his retirement in 1999, and despite health problems, he still kept busy. In his retirement, he worked on behalf of charities and campaigned to bring the World Cup soccer tournament to South Africa. In the summer of 2010, his efforts paid off when the tournament arrived to South Africa. Nelson Mandela will have a state funeral, and current South African President Jacob Zuma ordered all flags in the nation to be flown at half-staff from Friday until the funeral.
His life was a series of battles, but in an interview on his 90th birthday, he said he'd do it all over again. Mandela will lay to stay, and a week from today, from Sunday, he'll be buried. So, Aaliyah, Josh, it's no question that his legacy will live on.
Indeed. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa. Nelson Mandela's life was an inspiration to many people, and his passing leaves the world grieving.
Drew inspiration from Nelson Mandela's life. My very first thing I ever did that involved an issue or a policy or politics was a protest against apartheid. We've lost one of the most influential, courageous, and profoundly good human beings that any of us will share time with on this earth.
Mandela's influence spanned worldwide while helping oppressed people and fighting against apartheid in his hometown or home country of South Africa. After his passing, a moment of silence was held on the New York Stock Exchange. Meanwhile, mourners gathered outside his home in Johannesburg to celebrate his life and legacy. World dignitaries expressed their sorrow and shed light on what his life meant to the world.
We'll always love Madiba for teaching us that it is possible to overcome hatred and anger in order to build a new nation and a new society.
Interim Mayor Todd Gloria has asked San Diegans to keep flags at half-mast until next Monday to honor Nelson Mandela.
And Nelson Mandela's death was actually announced promptly after a movie premiere about his life in the UK. Stars gathered Thursday night for the premiere of Long Walk to Freedom. As the credits rolled, the crowd was informed that Nelson Mandela had died. High-profile celebrities like Prince William and Mandela's own daughter were in attendance. The film beat out top contenders to be named the top selection of the 2013 Royal Film Performance. It is a biography of his life and legacy.
6 people have now been arrested in connection to the radioactive material taken from a stolen truck near Mexico City. Earlier this week, thieves stole the cargo vehicle carrying a metal container of cobalt-60 from a gas station in Tepejoca, outside of Mexico City. The truck was traveling from Tijuana to Mexico City. Authorities say all of the radioactive material has been accounted for. Officials have since blocked off the area where the material was found, and so far there are no other confirmed cases of radiation exposure to nearby residents.
Iceland makes history this week as police fatally shoot a man for the first time in their history. Police were called to the home of a 59-year-old man who was firing a shotgun inside his residence. He then opened fire on police and a brief gun battle ensued, injuring the suspect. He was then taken to a local hospital and pronounced dead. The investigation is still ongoing, and the police have even personally apologized to the victim's family.
What originally started as a dispute over Ukraine aligning itself with the European Union or with Russia has now turned into public protests. Thousands of protesters in Ukraine continue to occupy the main square at Kiev, braving sub-freezing temperatures. Ukraine's president backed out of a trade deal which would have aligned the Ukraine with the European Union rather than Russia. His decision prompted the protests, which have lasted about 2 weeks. Over the weekend, there were about 300,000 people in the square at Kiev. Thousands still remain, and it is unsure how long protesters will stay in the square.
A survivor of the New York train crash, Dr. Denise Williams, announced her plans to sue Metro North for unspecified damages. The NTSB stated that the train's brakes appeared to be working fine, and that although Rockefeller had recently come off a night shift, he was 2 days into a 5-day work week.
I don't know the specific time he finished the shift, but the day was a typical 9-hour day, and these days were routine days. There's every indication that he would have had time to get full restorative sleep. That's correct.
Prosecutors are not saying whether it could lead to criminal charges as they wait for the NTSB investigation. Rockefeller's lawyer says his client had a good night's sleep before the crash, but 2 weeks prior his shift changed from late night to early morning.
Audio from the 911 calls from the tragic shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School have been released. Due to the graphic content, we will not be playing them on our newscast. The Connecticut Freedom of Information Committee released audio from 7 phone calls. One of the recorded calls was a state police officer, and another is from a Sandy Hook Elementary School custodian. Next Saturday, December 14th, marks the 1 year since the tragic shooting, which claimed the lives of 20 children and 6 adults.
Obamacare enrollment is on the rise. This past week, more than 29,000 people signed up for health insurance. That's according to a source familiar with the enrollment numbers. Healthcare.gov has faced many problems with enrollment since it first launched on October 1st. But on Tuesday, President Obama was all smiles when he addressed the country about the recent fixes.
Every day I check to make sure that it's working better. And we've learned not to make wild promises about how perfectly smooth it's going to be at all times.
The Obama administration says with the new updates to the website, it can now handle up to 800,000 users a day.
Find out what online giant created a lot of buzz this week.
And the Charger playoffs hopes are still alive, but barely. We'll tell you more about it after the break.
Thanks for calling the GED Pep Talk Center.